I joined the club in 1978, and my wife didn't like the club, and she didn't like sailing.
Closer.
Better?
Yeah.
Okay. She didn't like the club, and she didn't like sailing. And so it all kind of started on the last Guadalupe race. You remember when we had the Guadalupe race? Well, I went with Alec Oberschmidt on the last Guadalupe race. I don't know if any of you remember it, but the weather looked okay when we started, but about halfway down to Guadalupe, we had 50, 60 knot winds and 50-foot seas. You won't believe that, but the boat would be 100 yards away, and you couldn't even see the top of the mast. So by the next day, we had yachts scattered over half of the Pacific Ocean. And between the U.S. Coast Guard and the Mexican Coast Guard, we finally gathered them all up. I remember going down the west side of the island. Alec had one of the young guys steering, and of course he jibed the boat and broke the boom. I stayed up all night and jury-rigged the spinnaker pole into a new boom with, jiffy reefing, and so we started off and looked like we were going to be okay. But partway through the night, I was steering, and I see the pin come out of the shroud, and so fortunately, I was able to flip it over and not lose the mast. They cranked me up in those winds and got the pin put back in. I had a pretty good toolbox full of stuff. And we got into Ensenada, big party. But I'll try and shorten the story up. That was the last time the club ran the Guadalupe race. Bert Benjamin had a guy that was badly injured. A lot of people had a lot of injuries, but nobody died. But they decided not to have the Guadalupe race anymore.
Were there 3 broken masts?
There were a lot of them. It was nasty. So, in any event, during that Guadalupe race, not only was it a bad sailing weekend, but my then wife decided to have an affair with the maitre d' at the Furnace Creek Inn. So not only did we wreck the boat, but we kind of wrecked the marriage, which wasn't that great either. She decided that vacationing at the Furnace Creek Inn was better than sailing. So that marriage didn't last very long. Second marriage didn't work very good either. So the Southwestern Yacht Club has been really, really, really tough on marriages for me. The third time, I thought, this is not working out. I'm going to pick out a wife that's already a member. So improve the odds. So I married Susan Witt, and just so everybody will relax, she's not here, but she's still my wife. She's just out of the country. And she's a terrific wife, and she loves the yacht club, and she's a good sailor and a terrific wife. So, yeah, so that's that. Now what I really want to tell you about is my friend Paul Whitehead. Now, if he isn't all of your friends, I'll be shocked.
Yeah.
Now, he was my friend from the day I joined the club until the day he died. I spent most of my life trying to make a living, but at the same time I was running this ranch up in South Dakota, and I don't know why it is, but something about ranching, people think who've never had one, that it's some kind of romantic life like the Marlboro Man. Yeah. And people always say, well, you have a ranch? And I say, no, it's got me. And so Paul was kind of having a hard time. I don't know how many of you ever met Betty, his wife, and I hope you're not all friends with Betty, because Betty and Paul were not a good combination. Betty hated the yacht club, and Betty hated sailing. So Paul was really down in the dumps and having a hard time. And so one time I said, well, Paul was a true hippie. He had to go on the road all the time. So on one of his road trips, I said, well, why don't you just come by South Dakota and see me while you're on this road trip. And he said, okay. So one day he just popped in. Didn't even know he was coming. And he stayed a few days. And I said, well, Paul, you know, why don't you stay a week or so and, you know, we'll do some stuff. And he did. And he seemed really, really unhappy. And I said, well, what's got you? And he said, well, you know, Betty and I are just not getting along. And I said, well, what's new? And I said, well, why don't you just get a divorce? It's easy. And he said, no, it's not. And I said, well, why isn't it easy? He said, well, you know, there's the property, and I don't know. I said, well, you know, I've done it a bunch of times. It's really easy. He says, well, how do you do it? And I said, well, it's easy. Give them everything you've got, and just leave with your Levi's and a couple of T-shirts and your deck shoes, and tell them you won't pay them a penny of alimony. And they'll immediately say, well, that won't work. And I said, well, how do you expect to get any more if you've got everything? And I just got my Levi's and 2 T-shirts and my deck shoes. You can't squeeze blood out of a turnip. And he says, well, I'll go see if she'll go for that. And so I said, go give her that, and then move up here and just live with me on the ranch. You can stay in my house. And first of all, we've lost money 13 straight years. So if I not only won't pay anything, I can't pay anything, but you can come live with me, and you can buckaroo and just see if she'll go for it. So apparently over a period of time, she did go for it, because they owned a bunch of real estate, and they just weren't, I don't know if you know her, but they just weren't suited for each other. So that's how it all started. And so for years and years and years, Paul came, worked on the ranch. He became a really good buckaroo. He rebuilt all the houses, and I'll be honest with you, I don't think I ever paid him a penny. I don't know if you remember the red truck, but I did give him the red truck. And I don't know how long he drove it, but he went on the road and drove it a lot of miles. But Paul was my very best friend I've ever had in my entire life, and a damn good cowboy, and a really good carpenter. And the best thing about it is you don't have to pay him anything. If you feed him really good and give him a real good saddle horse, and you be his friend, man, you'll never find another good one like him.